And now we'll go to our usual section where we do our general catch-up of films and TV shows that we've seen and that we enjoyed, or maybe we didn't. So yeah, anything you've been watching or recently, Tommy?
So mine's not really a recommendation because I don't think you'll ever watch this, but I wanted to talk about Daredevil Born Again. I wanted to tell you all about it and hear your thoughts and see your reaction.
Yeah.
So you haven't really seen any of the Daredevil show, did you?
When the Netflix series first came out, I think I watched either just the first season or most of the first season, and I remember enjoying it, but just for some reason it just didn't grab me.
Yeah.
It felt a little bit low budget and to be honest, it's really well made still. It just didn't grab me. And when Daredevil Born Again came out again, I went back and watched some of the first season of the Netflix Daredevil, and I actually started to enjoy it more, so I think I will finish that first season. But yeah, not enough for me to catch up on all the Daredevil stuff to be up to date for Born Again.
That makes sense. Totally fair. I, on the other hand, love Daredevil. Fucking love Daredevil. I remember getting a Netflix subscription just to watch Daredevil. Netflix was the Daredevil app for like the first few months that I had it. Love Daredevil, even though it was low budget, as you said, even though, it was a little bit disjointed and disconnected from the larger MCU, which I was a huge fan of at the time. I found it really refreshing, really dark, really gritty, really bloody. The fight sequences, everything was just speaking to me. I love it. I love this rendition of Matt Murdock. I love this rendition of Wilson Fisk. Vincent D'Onofrio fucking kills it. So yeah, I was really looking forward to this new season. I'm happy that they're back, and I just finished watching the final episode of Born Again earlier today, and I like the show overall, I guess, even though it's silly. It's very silly in parts. I don't care that it's silly. It's Daredevil.
Controversial take there, Tommy.
I mean, it's a blind lawyer fighting crime in a red outfit, so I think it's silly even when it's not.
Was the Netflix Daredevil silly?
It could be. There was a ninja cult that was trying to take over Manhattan. There was a woman who was resurrected in a sarcophagus. There was a hole in the city that led into, I don't even remember what, and they were trying to mine like dragon bones to make weapons. So, it could be silly.
But the tone certainly wasn't, was it? I feel like the Netflix interpretation of Daredevil is very serious and very grounded.
That was what I loved about it. They nailed this element of Daredevil character, which is so fascinating to me. He's a blind lawyer, justice is blind. He's also a devout Christian, but he dresses as a devil because he feels like this part of him is a sinner. He enjoys the idea of beating up criminals. He carries his father's spirit. He was a boxer. So there's all these elements really work super well. And Charlie Cox just nails the character. I can't see anyone else playing this character. He even voices Daredevil now in animated Marvel stuff. So I just love that. I just love that he's back as this character.
Yeah, and I do love it when superhero shows will take it seriously. The source material, it can be silly, but all the people who are fans take this stuff to some degree seriously. And like what we see in a lot of Disney stuff, they always have to reference like, oh, how silly the costume is, or how silly the name of this villain is. And it's like, no, we actually love that shit. So you think it's silly, but we actually enjoy it, and that shows a contempt for the source material.
Yeah, I hate that. I despise that. When I use the word silly, I'm not using it as an insult. I'm using it as to describe it.
On the surface, of course, it's ridiculous.
If you go into it expecting Better Call Saul because he's a lawyer, you're not going to get that. You're going to get a very different show, but it's a fine show. But what I wanted to talk to you about, given our recent conversation on the MCU and whether or not the MCU is going to be back or not, and you had a very strong opinion that he's not going to come back. This is a case for me to say the MCU is kind of back, maybe a little bit.
Whoa.
No, I'm just trying to justify the rant that I'm gonna go into now because I want to tell you about this show. I think it's an interesting conversation that we're going to have, because this show has some very great moments and some of the dumbest shit that I've ever seen in TV. And some of this stuff happens within the span of like 10 minutes in the same fucking episode. It's so interesting how disjointed this show feels. And when you look at the whole thing, like I just finished watching the final episode and it just feels like a Frankenstein monster of a show. So this brings me to the production of Daredevil Born Again, and I want to ask you if you know anything about how this show was made.
Yes, I'm very aware of a lot of the background of the show. So I know that originally was shot very differently, and it was very different to the Netflix version. I don't think even Foggy, or what's the lady's name?
Karen.
I don't think either of them were even in the Daredevil Born Again show,
Correct.
the Disney's interpretation one. And so I know they probably received some backlash for that, as obviously other MCU projects weren't very successful. And I know they did a lot of significant reshoots for this, and they brought those characters back to try and implement them in a big way in the story, to try and go back to a bit of the roots. And so that totally makes sense what you just said, that in one episode you can have a great scene and then a terrible scene straight afterwards, because it's probably written by, I don't know, several different people and made by so many different people.
Yeah, so the show started production in 2022. Then in 2023, the writer's strike halted production before the show was completed, but they already shot like 6 episodes basically. And during that strike, the higher ups at Marvel and Disney reviewed the 4 episodes or 6 episodes that they had and decided to scrap the show.
Do you know what was behind that decision to scrap it?
So I guess they weren't satisfied with what they had. Basically, the show was more of a procedural, episodic. It was more like She-Hulk than the original Daredevil.
Oh, that's a great template to base your new show off. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, given the reaction that people had to She-Hulk, they decided to retool it and make it into a direct continuation of the Netflix show, which I think they should have done from the get-go, honestly. So some of the showrunners, some of the writers, and some of the directors were also replaced, and the story was completely overhauled. But the old footage, they didn't want to throw that away, of course, so it's still in the show. And they mostly add stuff at the beginning and at the end. So the first episode is almost all of it new stuff. And then you have a little bit of new stuff sprinkled throughout the episodes coming after. And then the last 2 episodes are again completely new stuff that they shot recently. And you can tell so much. It's insane. It's so funny. It's like Fun 4-stick levels of, oh, I can see the reshoots because Rooney Mara has a wig in the scene and she doesn't have a wig in this scene. It's insane. There's so much ADR to kind of like make sense of where scenes are placed and characters show up, and it's a mess.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah, but there's some good stuff too. So Deborah Ann Woll, who plays Karen, and Eldon Henson, who plays Foggy, were brought back for a little bit. They are not in the show that much because they were replaced by new characters.
They featured heavily in the marketing of the film as well.
Yeah.
Which is a classic, but I mean, people hate that it's the bait and switch. You sell the audience on the promise of we'll be with these characters, and I think a lot of people hated Last of Us Part 2 for that reason too, because I know that they basically disappear for like the whole season pretty much after that first episode.
I mean, I'm not going to go into the details of it because there's no point. But yeah, basically they show up at the beginning, then they disappear, and then some of these characters come back at the end because, of course, it was part of the reshoots. John Bernthal is reintroduced as Frank Castle, the Punisher. They have one scene in one episode at the beginning of the show, then he disappears completely and he comes back in the last episode. And I thought, again, the stuff that they do with him is amazing. It's so good, but it doesn't work that well because you haven't really built up to it. And I guess they will do a Disney Plus movie on the Punisher, so I guess they're setting up that. But yeah, it's weird. So we have 2 shows existing within one show, episode by episode, and sometimes, as I said, even within the same episode, you can feel these shifts in direction, in tone, in framing. It's not even necessarily worse or better, it's just different. Like from one episode, it's very bright, very colorful, very Marvel TV, and then the next episode is just this very artistic framing and coloring, and it's so different. It feels like it's 2 different shows. It's not terrible, as I said, and in part it's actually really good. So the good is that the performances are super strong and some of the fight sequences are pretty cool. Visually, the show mostly works, even though some of the CGI doesn't really hold up. Daredevil feels like a different character now that they have Disney Plus money, so they can leap from building like Spider-Man. It's a bit weird.
Yeah. I've seen a couple scenes of him like jumping around on rooftops, and he's fully CGI in some of those bits, and it looked terrible.
Yeah.
Some of those
It
bits.
looks bad, and also it looks like CGI. And there's like a moment in the first episode where they want to have this cool scene of him just like jumping around on rooftops, but it's obscured and fog because I guess they knew that the effect didn't look that good. And then there's this scene where it's a very comic booky pose. He throws himself at this wall and then slides down. But like the way he slides down, it feels like they grabbed the PNG and just dropped it down a little bit. It was so weird, man.
Yeah.
But I guess that's more comic book accurate, so I can't really complain.
No, you can complain if it's an expensive show and it looks like shit.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fair.
So I want to tell you about 3 separate moments of bad dialogue. And I think that's going to be fun for us to go over. And this kind of gives us the opportunity to go over a little bit of the arcs that they do in this show. The main arc is Matt is not Daredevil anymore, and Wilson Fisk wants to become mayor. Spoiler alert, he becomes the mayor, even though, he's a criminal and everyone should know that, but that's not important. The first proper arc of the season has Matt representing a man named Hector Ayala, who's been accused of killing a cop by throwing him under a subway train, right? He didn't kill him. He was trying to help a guy who was being beaten by the police on the platform. But during the scuffle, one of the officers trips, falls on the train track, and gets hit by a train. Well, Hector is one of the best parts of the show. The actor passed away, actually, last year. So I think he did a fantastic job. He basically plays this vigilante character named White Tiger. I wish we got more of him in the show, which is a sentiment that permeates the whole experience because so many characters are introduced and then dropped and then they don't really care, and maybe they're going to do something with them in a following season. It's such a mess, man. This show is focused on Matt and Fisk. There's no much room for anyone else, which sometimes feels a little bit claustrophobic, I guess. But Hector is good. He's secretly this vigilante guy named White Tiger, but he wasn't wearing the costume, right? At the time of the incident, it was just going down the platform, trying to help this guy, and then the incident happens. So the fact that he's a vigilante is going to be used against him in court. It's actually a very interesting premise. So Matt is representing this guy, right? They are discussing the case. It's him, the judge, and the other prosecutor in a room. And they're like, oh, but he's a vigilante. And, this was vigilante justice, and we need to stop it. And Matt says, completely seriously, by your honor, he wasn't in possession of his mystical amulet. And that's a line of dialogue that Matt Murdock pronounces in front of a judge in the new Daredevil Born Again TV show.
And what's the judge's reaction to that?
They just take him seriously, and in part, I love this because it shows you, oh, Daredevil is in this Marvel Cinematic Universe of people who can fly and have powers. So, a mystical amulet doesn't really sound that weird. But when you put it in a conversation that is really 100% serious, I was taken aback. I was really taken aback.
That's why Daredevil, as a character, always is better with the street level crime and the more grounded stories within the Marvel Universe. Because, you can't have a lawyer procedural show with all these. Well, I mean, She-Hulk tried to do it, have a procedural lawyer show with all these more fantastical elements in it, and it was stupid.
I mean, that can be an interesting premise. At one point there's a throwaway line. There's this guy that is in jail for robbing a store, and he was like, "Oh, what if he was a Skrull?" And it's like, that's interesting. It's interesting that in this world you have aliens who can shapeshift into anyone, and people
Oh my God,
are gonna use it.
That
as a way.
That must cause some serious legal issues. It's like, no, it wasn't me, it was a Skrull.
Yeah. So, it's interesting that they have these kind of conversations because it links it back to the larger universe, but it still feels silly.
Yeah.
But this was one example of bad dialogue. There's another one, and it's in episode 5. Episode 5, you're going to love this, Tyler, because episode 5 is a bottle episode. It's one of the classic one-shot kind of comic book issue. Matt Murdock goes to the bank. He has to request a loan. It's St. Patrick's Day. Group of Irish robbers attacks the bank. He has to stop them without revealing his identity. I love the idea of an episode like this.
Yeah.
It's a type of episode that we kind of lost with the streaming shows, right? You series either feel like stretch out movies or have fewer episodes compared to older TV shows. So, these kind of inconsequential episodes with a fun premise, they're quite rare. So It's good. They even use the same bank as the film Inside Man. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, I love that film. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they use the same bank. Unfortunately, it's not as good as Inside Man.
I didn't think so.
Oh, no? What a surprise. The episode itself is actually quite dull and cliche. If you've ever seen a bank heist in a movie or a show, you've seen this one. We got the cop on the outside negotiating with the robbers leader on the phone and kind of like exchanging quips. We got Matt playing the silly blind man. He tricks the robbers, takes them out one by one, which is fine. And then we have a guest character in this episode, Tyler, that I'm really excited to tell you about. It's a guest character from the larger MCU that plays a big role. As we said, Daredevil is official in the MCU. He can now run into any character from the MCU. This opens up endless, exciting possibilities, Tyler. And what better way to welcome our hero in a larger universe than for him to meet, drumroll please, Yusuf Khan, Kamala Khan's father, Miss Marvel.
You joking? I thought he was like being investigated for like some sexual.
Yeah, that too. That's weird too. Sexual stuff. Yeah, I don't know. But he's back
What?
as Kamala Khan's father, and he wants you to know it. And he has some of the best dialogue in the show. So it spends the first few minutes of the episode kind of like repeating who he is in case you forgot or in case you haven't seen the stuff that he's in, which, you know, is mostly everyone who hasn't seen Ms. Marvel. And
Essential exposition, I'm sure he's giving there.
yeah. So it's like, my daughter Kamala, she's in California visiting some friends there, La La Land, as they say. And then there's this line of dialogue that haunts me in my sleep. Later in the episode, he is forced to open the vault by the robbers. Matt manages to get down to him. He gets rid of a couple of the robbers, and they are alone on the vault level. And he's trying to use his amazing earring to open the vault and get inside. And I'm gonna try to replicate the gravitas that Yusuf Khan uses to say this line. He says, and I quote, "This vault has a 4-turn tumbler system, which means it has over 100 million possible combinations. You can't just crack it open like it's a piggy bank I gave Kamala to instill in her the value of saving."
Oh my god.
This is a line in the show. I
Fucking hell.
had to stop and rewind because I was like, what am I even looking at? You can't just crack it open like it's a piggy bank I gave Kamala to instill in her the value of saving.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sure Matt Murdock thought he was just gonna pop it open like a piggy bank. Oh my god, that's awful.
Okay, we're almost done, I promise. Another arc in the show revolves around this character named Muse.
He's like a serial killer in it, isn't he?
Yeah, he's one of the secondary villains in the show. He's a graffiti artist. Basically, think Banksy if he was a psychopath. And he murders like 60 people in the show. He takes their blood and uses it to paint graffiti all over New York.
Okay.
Nobody catches him, even if he has a very obvious hideout in an abandoned subway tunnel. Nobody knows where he is. And he's slightly changed from the comics. I'm not familiar with this character from the comics, but basically, he doesn't seem to have any superpowers that he does have in the comics. And this leads to them having to justify how he can fight Daredevil and keep up with him, which is something that we said earlier. We were talking about The Last of Us, and you said, you need to establish when a character knows, martial arts because that's important. And I agree somewhat, but you can do it in a good way and you can do it in a bad way. And I think they did it in a slightly comedic way. So basically, there's this very dramatic scene, and it's an intercut between Mayor Fisk, Vincent D'Onofrio's character, being informed about Muse's identity by a detective, and it's intercut with a scene where Muse himself, who's in civilian clothes, looks like a regular guy, is talking to a therapist. Right? And the therapist, mind you, is another major character in the show. She's, of course, Matt Murdock's girlfriend.
I think I've heard about this scene, but go on.
Muse has decided that she's going to be his final victim. Of course, Matt Murdock's girlfriend, she's a therapist. And by the way, she not only is Muse's therapist, she also is Fisk and Vanessa's marriage counselor. So basically, for some reason,
this lady is in high demand, clearly, across New York City.
She's writing books. She does everything. It's insane. Anyway, in this scene, Wilson Fisk is sitting at his table, has the report in front of him, and he's reading the detective's report out loud to the detective like it's new information. It's like involuntary commitment when he was 15. Expelled, blah, 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 involuntary commitment when he was 17. Another one when he was 20. He certainly does have issues. And then the detective says, "There is one more thing, sir. How familiar are you with Taekwondo.
What?
And then we shift to Muse and the therapist talking, and Muse is like talking to her, is like remembering stuff from his past, his parents, and he says very gravely, "Did I ever tell you I used to compete in Taekwondo?"
Oh, Jesus. Jesus.
And they make it this traumatic experience where his parents like forced him to do Taekwondo, so he basically is jacked and super strong against his will. Oh, by the way, as I said, he is visiting the therapist in civilian clothes, right? He's not Muse in this
Yeah.
moment, but they need him to be in costume in the next scene. So when he gets to the office, he has this huge bag with him where he keeps the costume. And like she doesn't even address it. Anyway, this is the kind of stuff that I love to hate because
Now,
who in the right mind?
does he fight like he does Taekwondo? I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but
I'm not super familiar with Taekwondo, but he's not a very good Taekwondo guy.
because Taekwondo is all about, like, there's a lot of crazy kicks and people with insane flexibility and lots of spinning kicks and things like that. And it's like,
Maybe he does one kick. I don't know, man. The fight was boring.
yeah, I can imagine there's just something they've said, and the writer doesn't have a clue what Taekwondo even is. They just know it's a martial art, and that establishes him as an excellent fighter straight away.
Yeah. But the funny thing is, as I said before, the problem with the show is that so many characters are introduced and then they just either die or they're dropped or like they don't really have any consequence. He is briefly introduced at the beginning of the show, then he disappears for a few episodes, then he comes back, Daredevil fights him, then he escapes, and then basically you have this sequence that I just described to you where he is at the therapist, and then the next scene is Daredevil going to him and they fight and then he dies. So like they basically had to, okay, we need to tell people that he knows Taekwondo because they're not going to be so confused about the fact that they're fighting. And I'm like, no, we're not going to be confused. It's just a guy and he fights him. It's okay. You don't have to say that he's Taekwondo artist. I don't
I
know.
think if obviously to a degree, Matt Murdock has superhuman abilities, but he doesn't have superhuman strength. So I don't need to have to be told necessarily how someone could go up against him. If you need that when a character is like Captain America and you see someone who's like normal going up against him, like they need to have that addressed especially. Yeah, that sounds really dumb. Like that's just bad writing.
Yeah, bad writing. And I think Muse in the comics, from my understanding, his power is that he can become invisible to anyone. Like he can hide his pulse. So basically, he is the perfect villain for Daredevil because he uses all the other senses but sight to kind of like find his opponents, and he becomes invisible to him. That would have been such a much more interesting and engaging way.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, we're already establishing more so in the Disney's version of Daredevil that we are in the MCU. There are more fantastical elements here, so why not give Muse those superpowers?
It was a missed opportunity. I guess maybe if they bring him back, but I don't think they will. And the last funny thing about this sequence of events is that Matt, at this point, he needs to find out what Muse's plan is, right? He doesn't know what he wants to achieve, to accomplish. So he goes to Muse's lair and he starts going through the sketches and the drawings because he's a graffiti artist. So, his lair is filled with like drawings and sketches, and he's blind, right? Daredevil is blind. So the stuff on the page makes no sense to him. He can't make out any of the images that he could use as clues.
Did they forget he was blind in the show?
No. I mean, there's one scene where he's kind of like looking at the paper, and I'm like, did you forget he's blind? But no, he removes his glove and he tries to touch the stuff. We've established that he kind of is able to read writing on paper thanks to his super powerful fingertips. I don't know. He's looking through these drawings, right? He's touching them. He's trying to make out what they are. And then he comes across an acrylic painting. So, big crusty brush strokes you can feel on your fingers. And somehow he understands that the painting is her girlfriend's face. They even have this flash, like he touches the paint and then he flashes back to that morning when he was touching her girlfriend's face and he's like, oh
my
and he
God.
immediately understands that she's in danger, even though it makes no sense. And he runs and swoops in and saves her. So, yeah, these are just some examples. But it's actually a decent show.
Yeah. something. Oh my god, you really haven't sold it to me there, Tommy.
Because all the stuff that I haven't told you
Um,
about is actually pretty solid.
well, there's a couple other bits that I know about that I thought I've seen little clips from it and that have been sort of made fun of on
Go
the
ahead.
internet. There's a scene where Bullseye, he goes to prison, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's complaining. He's like complaining about going into general
Yeah.
population, and he's like scared about it. This dude's scared about going to a normal prison. He's like he's supposed to be like one of the most badass assassins in the world. Why would that worry him at all?
I don't think he was necessarily scared. I didn't read that scene that way. He was surprised that they would release him into the general public part of the jail because he was in prison, but he was kind of like isolated because he's a very dangerous criminal. And
Yeah.
actually what happens in the show is that he's released there because they want him to escape. I guess he kind of like he's figuring out why he would be put there. I don't know. I didn't find that moment especially egregious, to be honest. There's way more egregious moments, as you can tell from
Oh
my
yeah,
rambling.
yeah.
But
I'm not sure whether it was a conversation between Daredevil and Muse or Daredevil and Bullseye, but he says to one of them at one point, he's like, "I don't know whether I can trust you, dude. You're a lie detector. You don't need to know whether you can trust anyone. You know when people are
yeah,
lying all the
yeah.
time."
They forget about that when it's convenient.
Yeah, yeah, which is the whole best bit of his character, and it's like the core aspect of his lawyer and his crime fighting abilities. Yeah, it looks like a really bad show, to be honest. And I mean, obviously, you're saying it's got some great moments in it, and I'm sure, like I know any scene where you have John Bernthal and Charlie Cox like chatting together, I'm sure those scenes are really good because they're really great and they're pre-established characters already. So
It's so strange because you can really go from a scene that means nothing to an amazing conversation between two great actors. Wilson Fisk, again, Vincent D'Onofrio is just chewing the scenery as this insane person, and his relationship to his wife, and then even Bullseye himself. I thought, the actor, forget his name, he plays him very well. He's one of those guys, he has that stare where any scene is in, you're like, okay, he's gonna kill everyone in the room. But yeah, it is just not enough. He's not in the show enough. He shows up at the beginning, goes to prison, comes back in the last two episodes to kick the plot into motion again. And in the meantime, we have all the things that I just mentioned to you. Stuff that doesn't matter, characters who die in a couple of episodes. There's this very interesting subplot with police officers using the Punisher symbol to prop them up and kind of like bring justice in a not very just way, which is something that really happens with military personnel and like police officers in America. So they want to address this kind of stuff, and they do. But again, it's like, oh, this police officer does something clearly wrong and outside of the law. And then you discover that he's a fan of the Punisher with a Punisher tattoo and Punisher symbol on his bullets. By the way, Matt is able to figure out that there's a Punisher skull on the bullets of this person, even though he's blind. And I'm like, can he just have a friend there telling him, oh, there's a Punisher logo on it? Like, why does he have to?
well, that's what Foggy was there for.
Yeah, and they introduced this character named Cherry, who's like a retired police officer who basically is Foggy. Like, he's this like older man, but his function in the story is the same. He knows that Matt is Daredevil, and he tries to stop him from doing stupid shit throughout the show. And he has no personality whatsoever. It's so weird, man. It feels disjointed. It feels like two shows.
Yeah, yeah. And there was something I've heard that apparently the whole religious element of his character is almost completely taken out of Born Again.
I was so disappointed in that.
And that makes so much sense because Disney hates God. So
And they're the Antichrist.
it makes sense why they would why they would not reference that at all.
I mean, there is a couple of scenes. There is one specific scene in the early episodes that I really love when he's representing this white tiger guy in court. And then when the hearing is over, he's kind of like sitting on the benches, and the light coming through and the way it's shot, it looks like it's a church. And he's like sitting for confession or something. And that's one of very few moments where he's religious. Like, he has a cross pendant, he recites a prayer at some point, but that's it. He doesn't go into a church, he doesn't speak to any nuns or priests. Yeah, it's that part of his character is it's toned down quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's a massive part. It's a massive part of his character.
Yeah, it's a massive part of what makes him interesting. Is
Yeah.
the kind of tension between his willingness to hurt people and his Christianity, his faith. So yeah, disappointing in that. I guess they tried to change course halfway through, so we can pardon a subpar season because the intention is clearly to keep going.
Oh well, yeah.
They're making a new season. Some of it is already shot or they're shooting it right now. So if they changed course and then the next season is going to be a little bit more cohesive and tight, we could have a great new iteration of Daredevil that doesn't reach the greatness of that third season on Netflix, but that comes close to it, I guess, if possible. But yeah, a very mixed experience for me.
Yeah, and surprisingly, I thought viewership would be quite good for Daredevil in comparison to a lot of the other MCU
It's
shows.
not doing well.
No, ratings wise, it's really low. Not a lot of people are watching this, so yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here. Because I've heard they're setting up for another season, and they're trying to set up the Defenders again in this next season, and it's like, oh god, this is yeah. I mean, if you can't get your first season right, and you had to do such significant reshoots, you clearly don't have a plan for this, and which as we know from Captain America Brave New World and all these other MCU projects which go through such significant reshoots, it never works out.
Yeah, this is another project that started before there was kind of like a change of direction for the whole MCU. So the way they repurpose the show tells you that they want to change course, they want to improve, they want to make things a little bit better than they are, and this gives me faith. I still drink the Kool-Aid, I still try to believe that the worst stuff is behind us, and these next few projects will prove me either wrong or right. If Thunderbolts sucks and Fantastic Four sucks, then you will never hear me defend Marvel ever again. That's a promise. But for now, I'm cautiously optimistic because there was some good stuff in this show, even though we didn't really go into that much of the good stuff because it was funnier and more entertaining to go into the bad stuff. But it was good stuff with Daredevil and Wilson Fisk and their parallelism between the two.
But were you saying overall you probably wouldn't recommend it though?
I mean, it depends who you are, man.
Yeah.
If you liked the Netflix TV show, I could either recommend it to you because you want to see these characters back, or you could just tell you not to watch it because it doesn't hold up to the standards of the previous seasons, and you're better off just believing that it ended with season 3. But there is some good stuff in here. If you want to look for it, if you want to watch it, it's weird because so much stuff has happened in the MCU between the third season and this season, and Wilson Fisk kind of feels like a different character. But if you manage to remove that aspect of the character from the TV show you're watching and be like, okay, it's just a new story with Wilson Fisk doing stuff and Matt Murdock has to stop him. If you manage to get away from, the logistics of how can he become fucking mayor after all he has done, if you can, it's enjoyable in parts. It's well made in parts, just in parts.
Yeah. Okay.
I would give it a 6.5.
Okay, that's still a pretty decent score.
I'm a high grader.
I think you're drunk on the Disney Kool-Aid, my brother.
Yeah,
but...
I'm poisoned. There's nothing you can do about it. I'm just done. I'm lost.
Okay, good.